Every offseason, we see wild and unrealistic trade rumors for the Chicago Bears on social media, and we need to stop falling for it and engaging with it.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On the show today, we're going to go through a couple of the big names that we've seen, not even actually linked to the Chicago Bears, but more kind of just superfluous rumors, and explain why they don't even make sense. They're not functionally possible at this stage for the Bears or the teams involved with them, and why we can't keep engaging with it, because that just encourages further ridiculous fake rumor mongering and speculation that doesn't really get anybody anywhere. But I do want to look at a name that we haven't really seen talked about that much as a Bears trade target that makes a lot more sense and is a lot more realistic, just maybe isn't quite as big and splashy as the likes of Tyreek Hill or Nick Bosa or even Trey Hendrickson that we've seen floated out there. But I wanted to start with a bigger picture concept here of like these trade rumors, right? When someone puts it out on social media, a potential trade connection between a player and a team, even if you angrily react to that tweet and respond or quote tweet it or comment on the Facebook post or on Instagram or whatever it is, and you're critical of it, that engagement, you clicking on it and typing anything, tells social media to reward this person that has posted that thing. Whether it's true or not, and whether people like it or don't like it, if they are interacting with the post in any way, that rewards the person who posted the thing. And so generally, if there's something you don't like and you want to see less of, you're better off ignoring it than like reacting with it to criticize it and to try and put it down. Or you can screenshot it and repost it that way, but you can't interact with the actual post itself, or else it just sort of further propagates the spreading of said unrealistic rumor. And so the latest one that's been going around Bears social media over the weekend was the potential for Miami Dolphins wide receiver Tyreek Hill, who has long been rumored as a potential trade option for the Dolphins, looking to potentially move on from him in his contract and where they are in the team building process. And I should say the Tyreek Hill trade rumor, I thought was a little bit less engagement farming. So where this originated on social media came from Pro Football Talk and Mike Florio, who wrote an article about whether or not teams could try to trade for Tyreek Hill. And in his article, so he didn't post on social media saying Bears are interested in Tyreek Hill. It just, in his article, he was looking at contending teams that could be interested in Tyreek Hill, and he wrote, quote, "The Bears also would be an intriguing option, especially with former Chiefs offensive coordinator Eric Bieniemy on the coaching staff. They're currently loaded at receiver. It wouldn't work unless they'd send DJ Moore to Miami as part of the trade. It's a long shot for the Bears or any other team, but all it takes is one team to convince itself that Hill can be a difference maker." And so in that regard, Mike Florio over there is not like starting some rumor that the Bears are actually interested in Tyreek Hill, for example, but he's just throwing them out there as a team that has a connection, and that's, there's something to be said about connecting a player to a former coach on another team like Bieniemy and Tyreek Hill. But even this one is a trade that doesn't take much digging or thought to understand why it's totally unrealistic, and it wouldn't work for the Bears, probably wouldn't work for the Dolphins, and just isn't worth even putting words to a page about. That there's two levels of this. There's the sort of like broader football team building aspect, and then there's the literal dollars and cents salary cap aspect of why this wouldn't work. Let's start more abstract here. Like, are you going to trade DJ Moore right now for Tyreek Hill and play DJ Moore plus stuff for Tyreek Hill? Like, does that make the Chicago Bears a ton better? Are you going to disrupt Caleb Williams' relationship with his number one wide receiver from last year? Add a player like Tyreek Hill that has a certain locker room presence that perhaps the Bears are not keen on adding into the mix there? Like, the Bears are trying to learn Ben Johnson's offense, build team chemistry, and get better where they can, but they added Luther Burden at wide receiver. They have Rome Odunze. They got DJ Moore. The Bears don't get a ton better. Like, yes, Tyreek Hill's obviously a better wide receiver than DJ Moore when Tyreek Hill's at his best, but like, improving the Bears wide receiver position from a 8 out of 10 to a 10 out of 10 makes them that much better, but it's not like you're taking a weakness and making it a strength. You're taking a position that's already a strength and making it a little bit more of a strength, and that's an upgrade, but it doesn't feel like a priority for the Bears at this stage of the process. It just wouldn't make a lot of team building sense to feel like the move that's going to put them over the top. Is Tyreek Hill the difference between, missing the playoffs and making the playoffs? I'm not sure that's what this Bears roster is missing if they're on the edge of going over the top there. Then you add in the financial aspects that make this close to impossible to actually happen. That because the Bears just gave DJ Moore a really big contract extension last year, if they traded him now, they would still owe about $21 million of dead salary cap money on their books. They would only save about $4 million in that trade, and they'd still be paying him $21 to not be here, in addition to taking on Tyreek Hill's contract that's spread out through 2029, and he has a $27 million cap hit this season. Now, it would come down if the Bears traded for him a little bit. I think they'd take on, I think the Dolphins would retain about $15 million of that, so it could be closer to 12 for this year, but there's a bunch of money, and next year he's supposed to cost $51 million against the salary cap in 2026. The Bears cannot afford Tyreek Hill's contract as it stands right now, straight up. And they certainly can't afford Tyreek Hill's contract if they're also having to pay most of DJ Moore's contract when making a trade for him. Like, there's not a financial realism here. Like, okay, could the Bears restructure every contract on their team to try and squeeze as much cap space as possible to try and make a trade like this fit under the books? Maybe. I'm not even sure if they could create enough cap space if they wanted to, given how expensive Tyreek Hill is. But obviously, they're not going to bend over their entire financial flexibility just to make this one Tyreek Hill trade for right now. Like, there's just not really a football logic fit here, nor a financial logic fit here. And yet you still get Bears fans on social media either arguing about why it's a bad idea or daydreaming about why it's a good idea. And in either case, it's a waste of energy, a waste of brain capacity, a waste of conversation, a waste of everybody's time for a trade that just has no basis in reality whatsoever for this team. And the only people that benefit from it are people on social media that engagement farm in order to get that. And again, I'm not even I don't want to accuse Mike Florio on Pro Football Talk of engagement farming, because he wasn't just putting this out there to rile up Bears fans. He was just writing an article about Tyreek Hill and throwing out some potential teams. Like, that's just the nature of the business there. But it's the conversation afterwards on social that's just like, man, what are we doing? Wasting our time with Tyreek Hill talk. At least that one is a player that has some real trade possibility here, and the Bears are just a team that could potentially get him. But sometimes it's players that aren't even gonna get traded or don't seem very likely to get traded, and yet we're still talking about them as a possibility for the Bears. The other one was Nick Bosa from the San Francisco 49ers, and this one doesn't work for a lot of the same reasons a Trey Hendrickson trade wouldn't work. And we'll take a look at where this originated, which is even more ridiculous, and then why it doesn't make any sort of functional sense for the Chicago Bears next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. They make it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. LinkedIn's a great place to find hires because most of us are on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn I bet you're on LinkedIn. If you're not, a lot of your friends, family members, and coworkers are on LinkedIn. So there's a great pool of professionals. And you can reach people that might not be actively looking for a job, but hey, if the right opportunity happened to come across, they'd maybe consider it and come work for you. No wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So at least Tyreek Hill is a player that could realistically be traded by the Dolphins. There's been some real murmurings that the Dolphins may be interested in potentially moving on from him. But sometimes these unrealistic trade rumors don't even require like realistic trade candidates here. Like sometimes it's a player that's not even truly on the block, but everybody wants to find ways to make a trade for them, that the team's not actually really trying to get rid of them, but people look at the depth chart and say, well, they could be because of other players they've added this offseason. Maybe they want to save money. And that to me is where Nick Bosa comes in with this from the San Francisco 49ers. You know, the 49ers used a first-round pick on Mike Williams. They just traded for Bryce Huff from the Philadelphia Eagles. Nick Bosa is an expensive contract, and they're sort of in this, like, still trying to win, but they're an aging, older, expensive roster, and they're kind of trying to get younger on the fly. So I kind of get where people can make their own logic to make up a Nick Bosa trade rumor, but I just don't understand why now the San Francisco 49ers would want to trade Nick Bosa. Like that's what makes this unrealistic in the first place. The worst part though is like the source of this trade rumor was essentially out of thin air. It was one of these NFL social media accounts that just makes stuff up. And they tweeted a graphic that said Chicago Bears could pursue Nick Bosa in blockbuster trade. Like there's been no reporting, no one even like putting together a hypothetical trade here of Nick Bosa to the Bears. It was just an NFL, like a football social media account, not associated with the NFL itself, but just like an account that aggregates stuff and makes stuff up and throws a bunch of stuff at the wall to see what'll stick, to see what people will engage with and retweet and reply to, and whether they're mad at it or agreeing with it, doesn't matter. It all generates more revenue and more interest for these accounts that exist solely for this engagement farming. And all of a sudden you get Bears fans talking about a potential Nick Bosa trade to bring an edge rusher to Chicago. And so, of course, Bears could use another edge rusher, right? There's no secret that pass rush is a continued need for this Bears team. So you give an inch of a potential whisper of a pass rusher in a trade for the Bears, especially one as prolific as Nick Bosa, and it makes sense why Bears fans would want to get carried away daydreaming about, a guy who had 18 and a half sacks a few years ago and has been a fairly consistent double-digit sack guy, 4 straight Pro Bowlers, a great player. Like there's no detracting from how good Nick Bosa has been in the NFL. This is not an anti-Nick Bosa stance. There's no way in hell the Bears are trading for Nick Bosa right now. Like that's just not how this is going to work. Like, first of all, the Bears are not going to trade for anybody right now during OTAs and minicamp. Brian Pace has essentially said, we want to see how this roster plays out, and then we'll consider additions, before training camp and that kind of thing. So a Nick Bosa trade or a Tyreek Hill trade or a Trey Hendrickson trade. Not happening today, not happening tomorrow, not happening in the next few weeks. But let's think through this a little bit more realistically. Like the 49ers are still trying to win football games. Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch are always sort of rumored to be loosely on the hot seat, and they're going to trade away their star pass rusher. I mean, I understand that contract negotiations and challenges there are always something that's in the mix, and he's maybe feeling a little bit underpaid based on where his current salary is, but they've pushed a bunch of that money into the future, and his contract gets really expensive later on, so maybe they want to get out from underneath that and push that off to another team. But if they traded Nick Bosa, they would have Michael Williams and Bryce Huff as their 2 top pass rushers. It might be, without Nick Bosa, it might be the worst set of edge rushers, at least, in the NFL, because you take away a Pro Bowl player and leave them with a rookie and a kind of an Eagles cast-off. It's not a great pass rush. The Eagles need to have a good pass rush. So, the 49ers need to have a good pass rush. So it doesn't make a lot of sense for me that they're going to just eagerly move away Nick Bosa just to get rid of him to wherever, whatever team might take him. And then, of course, it doesn't make a lot of sense for the Chicago Bears to take on a pass rusher whose contract this year is a $20 million cap hit, but next year will cost $42 million. The year after that will cost $52 million. So like he's owed over $100 million over the next 3 seasons, well over $100 million over the next 3 seasons. Like the Bears have virtually zero functional cap space right now. So they'd have to clear $20 million to trade for him now. And then they would put them over the cap already for 2026 if they traded for Nick Bosa. And then, not quite over the cap in 2027, but you'd be investing $40 million in Bosa while you have $20 million in Montez Sweat, and it'll be $18 million, I think, next year in Dayo Odeyingbo. Like I'm no math major, but that's like $80 million on 3 defensive ends. Like they just don't have the cap space to afford all of this investment in a pass rusher. Like it's part of why Trey Hendrickson was the same conversation. We did a whole Trey Hendrickson podcast just recently after the draft, so we don't have to rehash the whole Hendrickson thing, but it's the same kind of situation. Like the Bears are not in a position to mortgage their entire future for one big name pass rusher when they just put a big contract into Dayo Odeyingbo and have a bunch of money tied up in Montez Sweat. And like Odeyingbo is a longer term, develop and hope he keeps getting better type of signing, not an immediate go all in on winning right now this year kind of signing. Like the Bears are just not in a position to give up draft picks and all their future salary cap flexibility to add a pass rusher for like the next year or two to try and go all in on right now. Like Dayo Odeyingbo was that big pass rush splash, and they need Odeyingbo and Sweat to be better. Like that's kind of going to be the secret. They might still add a free agent as a number 3 rotational guy before training camp, but the big splash, expensive, give up a bunch of draft picks, give a bunch of cap space type of pass rusher trade is just not going to happen. Like maybe Trey Hendrickson ends up somewhere that's not Cincinnati, and maybe Tyreek Hill ends up somewhere that's not Miami. I'm less convinced Nick Bosa ends up somewhere that's not San Francisco, but they're not going to be Chicago Bears. So we don't need to spend time in the Facebook comments and in the Twitter replies and on Instagram or wherever, whatever your social media is of choice, on Reddit for, talking about these just completely asinine, unrealistic possibilities that originate from nameless, faceless aggregation social media accounts that are just churning out churning out slop for the hogs to come feast on. And we can all be better than that and save ourselves some time. Like, yes, you can do it on Madden all you want and find ways to make the trades in the video games and have fun playing with those players on the Bears rosters. Absolutely go for it. But on the Locked On Bears podcast, I like to stay a bit more grounded in reality, and these guys are not that. I do think there's at least one name. There's one big name. Well, one not big in terms of the quality name, but there's one option that seems the most realistic for me. That like a trade candidate that the Bears could realistically be interested in. I almost slipped on the team. The other team could be interested in giving up that player, and it would make both sense with the connections for both sides here. So I want to go through a trade target that I haven't seen a lot of social media buzz or a lot of articles about what a Bears trade might look like here, but I think it makes a lot of sense, and I think this is the kind of trade we should actually be spending more time talking about next on Locked On Bears. The other position besides pass rusher that's been a very frequent or common trade rumor position that the Bears could target that we heard a lot about is running back. And I think a lot of that speculation has been based on guys like Breece Hall from the New York Jets, because of course, they have Braylon Allen from Wisconsin was their 4th round pick last year, and they have Isaiah Davis was their 5th round pick, and they've talked about having a little bit more of a rotation there. And now Breece Hall is entering, I believe, the last year of his rookie contract as a 2nd round pick, 22, 23, 24. Yeah, the last year of his rookie contract. So he's going to need a new deal. And so the Jets could realistically trade away Breece Hall because they don't want to have to pay him. So they're going to let him walk as a free agent anyway. So why not get something for him in a trade as opposed to playing out the final year of his deal and letting him go as free agency? Like Hall makes sense as someone that could be traded. And that's a name that we hear a lot around Chicago Bears trade rumors. And I'm not here to say that that isn't realistic at this point. Same thing with somebody like Kenneth Walker from Seattle, another name that entering the final year of his rookie contract. They have Zach Charbonnet. They just, they've drafted running backs in the last couple of years with Damian Martinez this year from Miami. They got Kenny McIntosh a couple of years ago out of Georgia. Like they have some other running backs in Seattle. Kenneth Walker was kind of part of the previous regime, and if they're going to let him walk in free agency anyway, that could also make some sense as a potential trade running back candidate there. I'm okay with them as names that we can talk about as potential options here. But I'm surprised that we don't talk more about a player who I think is more realistic in the sense of, like, I think his team will have more incentive to trade him, and he's got better connections to the Bears, and maybe also makes more financial sense here. Because with Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker, if you trade for them, you're trading for them and then also have to give them a big contract. And you still have DeAndre Swift under contract for a decent amount of money. You'd probably be a similar kind of money for Breece Hall or Kenneth Walker. So that's a lot of money to have invested in the running back position. And, you still have Roschon Johnson and Kyle Monangai, so are the Bears in a position to give to give up draft picks for running back and then a big contract for said running back? Like, maybe, could be. They want to see how their running backs go first, and I don't think they're going to make any running back trade until closer to training camp if they were to do so. But to finally come back around on this, the name that I haven't seen talked about enough, and it's been overshadowed by, Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker, is Antonio Gibson of the New England Patriots. He, to me, just feels like a real sweet spot here of the Patriots seeming ready to move on from him, the cost being very manageable, and the connection to the Bears being strong enough that Ryan Poles might pull the trigger on a deal like this. So Antonio Gibson was signed by the Patriots as a free agent last offseason to a 3-year deal worth, I actually don't have the number in front of me, but a moderate 3-year deal. I want to say his cap hit this year is like $4.5 million. So it's a 3-year, $11.25 million contract. He's going to cost $4.5 million this year and $4.5 million next year. Not dirt cheap, but not that expensive, right? If I think DeAndre Swift is at like $8 or $9 million, this is like half the price of DeAndre Swift is Antonio Gibson. Antonio Gibson, coming off of a little bit of a down year, he was in a rotation with Ramondre Stevenson, averaged 4.5 yards per carry, but only 538 yards. But he's kind of a pass-catching back over the course of his career. He's had no fewer than 200 receiving yards. Every season's career high was last year, 2023, the year before, I guess, with 389 yards on 48 receptions, where he was the go-to pass-catching running back for the Washington Commanders, whose offensive coordinator was Chicago Bears running backs coach Eric Bieniemy. So you've got a strong connection between Bieniemy, albeit only crossing over 1 year with Washington, but Bieniemy getting a lot of use out of Gibson as the pass-catching back with Brian Robinson in Washington 2 years ago. You could see him, if the Bears assess their running back room and say, we need a little something extra to go with Swift and Roschon Johnson and Monangai, they're just not quite going to cut it. Gibson would make a lot of sense. You have the Bieniemy connection, so your running backs coach literally is already familiar with the running back you would be adding. He's pretty darn affordable. Not cheap, but not overly expensive. But because he costs $4.5 million, that makes the Patriots more likely to want to get rid of him. They have Ramondre Stevenson as their starter, and they just used a second-round pick on Travion Henderson, who the Bears were rumored to be pursuing in the NFL draft. So Antonio Gibson's probably going to be the number 3 running back there behind Stevenson and Henderson, and he's costing $4.5 million. That's a lot for a number 3 running back. Presumably, with Mike Vrabel in the building now having really no connection to Antonio Gibson, he might be willing to move on from Gibson and make Henderson and Stevenson the running back duo there. Gibson still has 2 years left on his deal. Bears can, $4.5 million is like not nothing, but it's a lot more affordable than like the big splash trade, or a lot more affordable than trading for Breece Hall or Kenneth Walker and then having to give them a big contract that might cost twice as much of that. And with the Patriots already kind of viewing Gibson as their number 3 running back, if you're going to trade for him, it's not going to cost you a lot in terms of draft picks. I don't know what that is. Is that a 7th round pick? Is that a 6th round pick? Maybe even a 5th, some kind of pick swap. That's about it. Because there's some expectation or wonder that maybe the Patriots could just release Antonio Gibson and you wouldn't have to trade for him at all. And maybe that's the Bears' strategy. Maybe they just say, well, we're not going to give up a draft pick for him because we just don't think that he's going to stick on their 53-man roster, so we could still grab Antonio Gibson at the end of training camp and bring him in that way. But if you want to just make sure that he's yours, send him a 6th round pick for a running back that you think can be a key part of your running back rotation. I don't think that's that bad of a deal there. The Patriots get to save a little bit of salary cap space in the process. They get a late round pick in the process and get rid of a running back that they didn't really seem to want that much anymore anyway. And the Bears get a better number 2 option to compete with Roschon Johnson and Kyle Monangai, who has more pass catching upside than Roschon Johnson and Kyle Monangai. And you know, Antonio Gibson has been a 1,000-yard rusher before, back in 2021 when he was actually the every down starter. But he's just been a fairly consistent guy, not a home run threat, not like a playmaker waiting to happen per se. There's a reason why he's number 3 in New England, and the reason why the Patriots want to trade him. But I think if the Bears want some more experienced depth in their backfield with a player that the coaching staff, or at least a key member of his coaching staff, already has a connection with and can understand his work ethic, how he handles himself in the locker room, how he handles film, and how hard he works in meetings, how hard he practices, and his durability, right? Like all those little unknowns that you might normally get from trading for a player or signing a free agent. Eric Bieniemy can alleviate some of that from their 1 year together. So I just think an Antonio Gibson trade would make a lot of sense if indeed the Bears do decide they want to add at running back. And I just think it's cheaper and a better fit and more affordable and makes more sense than Breece Hall or Kenneth Walker, who you'd have to give up more draft picks for. Breece Hall is going to be the Jets starting running back for now. Kenneth Walker is going to be the Jets starting, or Kenneth Walker is going to be the Seahawks starting running back. If you're trading away for a team's starting running back, even if they're willing to give them up, the draft compensation is going to have to be higher. Gibson's a number 3, easier to get. So I just think that makes a lot of sense to me, and I haven't seen very many people talking about that as a realistic or just a name that comes up on the radar. You know, to me that's where I think that's where we should be putting more of our attention. I can't find a single article on any of the blogs or websites talking about Antonio Gibson as a Bears trade target. But why are we wasting our energy on Tyreek Hill and Nick Bosa? That it's never going to happen and never really has any legs when there's other names out there that have these direct connections and make more sense for both teams. So let's all collectively try and be better about not engaging with bad faith trade slop and be smarter about what does and doesn't make sense for the Bears, and taking the 2 seconds to even just look up that they can't afford Tyreek Hill, they can't afford Nick Bosa, they can't really afford Trey Hendrickson, but they could much more easily afford Antonio Gibson. It's not as fun, it's not as sexy, it's not as flashy, it's not as exciting, but sometimes building successful winning football teams is not about the flashy, exciting stuff. It's about the really solid moves of taking advantage of another team's trash and making that your treasure there. So I'm not reporting any Antonio Gibson trade. I'm not predicting any Antonio Gibson trade. Just think it makes more sense than a lot of the other trades we've been talking about. Hopefully we can try and have more informed, smarter Bears conversations on social media moving forward. And I hope that the Locked On Bears podcast helps with that just a little bit in whatever small way we can here. That's why you got to hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And as a programming note, we're going to be cutting back from every day to just 3 days a week during the June and early July weeks here. There's not 5 days worth of content every single week. And so starting this week, we're still going to be coming every Monday morning for you to start your week off right. I'm tentatively thinking Monday, Tuesday, Thursday is going to be our podcast released schedule, but we'll keep that updated. I will keep it as the same schedule every single week. I just got to feel that out as the week goes along. But expect a podcast Monday, Tuesday, and then Thursday. And then if as breaking news or big stories happen in between, we'll make sure we're on top of all of your daily Bears news and analysis, all the coverage you need right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. So make sure you're coming back tomorrow and make Locked On Bears your first listen once again for another opportunity to bear down.